Hey, it's JD here, and welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast, Class of Season 6, Showcase Spectacular. I am JD, as I said off the top, and you got to hear an extended version of the intro without dialogue, so without VO. So this is a very special moment for us all. I am speaking of special moments. I am joined by the Grand Poobah over at the SNL Network, Jon Schneider. How are you doing, Jon?
JD, doing great. Thank you for having me. So honored to be here to bring some more people into the SNL Hall of Fame. I feel like this is a throwback. You and I used to do this when you first started.
Yeah, absolutely. Never done it live like this before, though. So. But I suppose um, we're we're live to a certain extent, I suppose. Um, let's get right into this. Let's look at the current Hall of Fame up to season 5. And I think the best way to do that is to just sort of, rather than read them off, I'll just display them here at the bottom. They go in order of season. So Lorne Michaels was the inaugural member of the SNL Hall of Fame. And then beginning in season 4, we started doing the Don Pardo Award, which meant that Don Pardo got in, and last year the SNL Band got in. But other than that, it's a very wide swath of cast members, fewer hosts, and even fewer writers and musical guests. Jon, I guess off the top, I would ask you for your hot take on the composition of the current Hall of Fame. We already know your beef with the Lonely Island not getting in on the first ballot, but is there anything else that sticks in your craw?
I don't know if anybody wants to hear me go on about Justin Timberlake not being eligible to be voted for the Hall of Fame once again, but maybe we can right that wrong one day. But for now, yeah, no, I think that the voters every year continue to show how intelligent they are. I think that all of you who have listened to this podcast clearly love the show, and I think the people who are in the Hall of Fame from these few seasons really, cover a wide swath of the show. So I think that we should all feel pretty good about that. Naturally, you're going to leave people out when you're comparing a musical guest versus a cast member. But
Sure.
I'm pretty impressed. We got some writers that are in the mix here. And it's always tough, right? Like, baseball, football Hall of Fames, like any sport Hall of Fame, they've been around for dozens and dozens of years. Things are able to, go chronologically with them so that, we can cover, okay, let's get everyone in from the 1920s and then the 1930s in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And
Right.
it sort of makes sense that way. For the SNL Hall of Fame in a podcast format, there was no way to just say, okay, let's do the original cast and then the Ebersol year. It just doesn't make sense. So I think that what you did, JD, was pretty smart, which is you just slowly rolled out cast members and hosts with eligibility. And as a result of that, every season we've had an interesting mix get into the Hall to the point now where I feel like we can collectively say what is the difference between an all-time great performer on the show and what is just a very good performer on the show.
Yeah, well put. Well put. I should capture that and use that as the log line going forward. But it's interesting to sort of tag on to that, which is we've started to uh, run the well dry, I suppose. And so we made a decision to wrap it up in season 7. So season 7 will be the last season of the SNL Hall of Fame until
For now.
we revisit it, in 10 years or something like that for the 60th anniversary of SNL. But let's go to the ballot for this year, and we'll start by looking at the bottom grouping of um, nominees is the word I'm trying to say. From left to right, you'll see season 1 through season 6, and you'll see the name to the far left of the person. They are color coded, but I forget at this rate. Oh, Green is season 6. I know that. But you'll see that they're NA if they're not part of that. John, this is the bottom. And there's some here who hit very, very low spots on the bottom. Is there anything in this list that surprises you, seeing Taran Killam, move up 7 points, seeing you two strike out, right off the bat? Is there anything other than that jumps out at you?
So just remind me, if you're under 10%, are you done? Like, what was the rule
That's
here?
right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it looks like there are 4. Well, for a different reason, Paul Rudd is didn't make it after 5 years, after 5 seasons on the ballot. But you two, barely cracks 5.5%, so doesn't make it. Charles Barkley 8.3 and Danny DeVito 8.94. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that those, it sort of makes sense. Just it's really tough, right? Because we're telling all the listeners, all the voters, hey, pick the 15 people, but there's no like, hey, you have to pick one musical guest, you have to pick one host.
Right.
So because of that, there are performers like this that end up falling to the wayside. U2, I listened to the podcast that you guys did about U2. Really, really great points there as to why they're one of the best musical guests in the history of the show. But musical guests have had a tough time making it onto
the
Hall of Fame. So not so surprised there. Barkley, I think, is pretty polarizing as a host. So for me, I'm not super surprised. He's always very fun, but not the most beloved as a host, definitely as a TNT commentator. Danny DeVito, I think, we covered him a lot when we did our host countdown in the summer on the SNN. Truly a great SNL host, but maybe the most underrated one ever. So for me, that I'm not surprised that he didn't make it past this. And, that's one of those that maybe gets revisited 10 years down the road or whenever you decide to come back to this. And
John, then, where did he land on the host list, if you recall?
So he was, I think he came in around 50 on the host countdown list, but Bill and I had him like near the top 20. So wow. We were pretty high on, like, if you go back and you watch some of those, we were really high on him. So yeah, I have just opened that up on my end. So basically, I ended up putting Danny DeVito at 20 overall. Bill Kenny ended up putting him at 17 overall, and he came in from the listeners at 50. So the difference between, maybe those who have seen Danny perform on the show versus how he's looked at sort of makes sense here why he ends up coming in less than 10%.
Sure.
Yeah, and then just to continue on, I mean, Julio Torres goes down from 15% last season to 10% this season. So there are some writers on the ballot who perhaps bump Julio down in terms of their like iconic status with the show. JLD, first time host on the ballot this year, comes at a 10.61%, same as Julio. So that one to me, I definitely think should be relooked at. I'm glad that she made it over the threshold to be able to have some debate about her next season, because I think in her 3 appearances, she was fantastic, and people should really, really reconsider if she should get in or not. So for me, that's one. I think I had her pretty high on I had her 25 overall for hosts. So yeah, definitely one under consideration. Beck Bennett is a cast member who I think is pretty underrated as well. I'm glad he made it over, but yeah, for sure.
I was
maybe just
shocked,
not enough time.
12%.
Yeah, 12% for Beck. Maybe not enough time to consider about how good he was. I know he hasn't come back to the show since he left after season 46. So I do think maybe seeing him in the 50th special in February might remind people about how good he was. So I wouldn't be surprised if Beck is closer to that 25-30 range and slowly would be moving up if there was enough seasons for him to get in. Jon Hamm, a fan favorite SNL host, probably hosted one of the best SNL episodes ever his first time, and really just beloved among the fan community. A little lower than I was expecting, just bumped up a little bit, 15.9 to 16.2, so hovering around the same percentage. That's a big surprise for me. I had Jon Hamm as 16 overall for my hosts. And then Taran, you mentioned Taran. Yeah, I mean, he's a cast member who I think did actually carry a couple seasons of the show while it was transitioning. Yes. So another underappreciated performer that got some love here, moves up from 13.6 to 20.1. So he's definitely on the rise. I just don't know if he's going to have enough of a runway to get in at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, one season. I was going to say they've got 3 seasons left, but they don't. Oh, geez. I'm looking at the ballot for next year and there's 42 names on it. Yikes. Let's
Yeah.
go to the middle portion at this point. And it starts with Brett Armisen and it ends with Bob Odenkirk. And this is interesting to me because Shari and Joe, both on their weekly rankings, often had Mr. Odenkirk uh, only next to John Lovitz in terms of, getting into the hall this season. So to see him at the bottom of this list at 20% ostensibly is surprising to me. Is there anything surprising to you, John?
I'm not so surprised about that, if I'm going to be honest. I mean, clearly Bob Odenkirk, a huge name after SNL, and did write some amazing sketches during his time on the show. Maybe gets overshadowed a little bit by Conan, Greg Daniels, there Smigel. There's a lot of good writers that were. He was an all-star crew of writers at the same time. Very well known for writing Matt Foley, but after he left the writing team, so I don't know. He's a tough case, but I'm again glad it could still be debated with him. Herb Sargent is one that comes up next, 22.91. I mean, that's a guy who in his fourth season on the ballot continues to sort of get between 15 and 20%. He's somebody who I actually argued for on the
You
SNL Hall
did,
of Fame
yes.
in its third season. He's one of those that I think, JD, you should definitely consider for your special award that out of this, because the guy who was the original writer, helped create Weekend Update, was basically a head writer and worked on Update for 20 years. Like, he's one of those guys that maybe the most behind the scenes person who had the most influence on the show. So I think worth considering there.
Yeah.
Going up the list, tied with Herb, Cherry O'Terry, first season, almost 23%. I mean, again, so strong in 5 seasons on the show, never does come back. I think her relationship with Tina was a little bit iffy, so she never returns to the show, but somebody who I do think deserves more love. Zweibel, an original writer. I mean, there's nothing else to say besides the fact that, based on what he did to influence the original days of the show, should definitely be in. Rosie Schuster, you can argue the same thing, comes in at 24.02%. So Rosie on the rise, up from 15.9 last season. Aidy Bryant in her first season, 25.14%. I mean, Aidy, again, on a ballot with Kate McKinnon, does that perhaps push Aidy down? We'll see where Kate landed in a few minutes, but 25% to for Aidy, somebody who I think, again, like Beck, may become more beloved over time, but for now, I think this is a pretty solid showing in her first season on the ballot. Tracy jumps up a little bit from 23.6 to 25.7. Again, not sure if there's enough runway for Tracy here, but somebody who I think really found his niche in being himself on the show. So it will be interesting to see where he comes in season 7. Piscopo, okay, this is a good one. 26.82% for Joe Piscopo, one
Yeah.
of the biggest names in SNL history at a certain point of its history. 26.82%. I mean, certainly he's a polarizing guy nowadays, and even in retrospect at his time on the cast, but you cannot deny how crucial he was to a few seasons of the show. Statistically, just dominant. So that's one who I think when you get into the nitty gritty of the history of the show and the numbers of SNL, deserves some reconsideration there. So it'll be interesting to see if he goes up even further in season 7. Rachel Dratch, very beloved, goes up from 26.4 to 30.73. You can't help but love Rachel Dratch, but I don't know if there's a ceiling there, perhaps, with some of her other castmates. Just moving on to the difference between, I guess, very good and all-time great. Adam McKay, former head writer, actually goes down here. That's a little bit of a surprise. I mean, I know people love McKay and his relationship with Will Ferrell, something that's often talked about, but he goes from 35.25 in season 4, 35.5 around the same in season 5, and then down to 30.73 in season 6. So he's moving down, not the right direction for Adam McKay to get into the Hall of Fame. Bobby Moynihan, one of the most beloved cast members ever, starts off at a 31.84. Sneaky guy who might get in season 7. I think a lot of people love Bobby. So, with some big names maybe coming off this season, I could see him on the rise. So that's a good one. Anna Gasteyer goes down from a 35.9 to a 32.96. So this may be, 35.9, maybe her ceiling. similar to what we talked about with Rachel. Adam Driver, one of the best recent hosts in SNL history, has a 34.64. So that will be very fascinating to see if people put him in. Perhaps if another host, a big name host, gets in this time, maybe there's more room for Driver in season 7. How about this one, JD? Dave Grohl, in his final season on the ballot, goes from first season 32, second season 54, third season 55, fourth season 53, down to 35.2 in his final season.
Wow. I mean, I have to say it's stunning, but I'm wondering how much influence. Well, obviously 15 points at least. His recent in quotes scandal has uh, caused. I can't think of another reason for him to have lost that many points.
I would think it's that. And again, if you're gonna, I know Paul Simon's in the hall. If you're gonna think of any musical guest throughout the entirety of the show that's had more of an influence on it, you're hard pressed to give me other names besides Dave Grohl. So, unfortunately, didn't make it here again. If JD comes back and decides to revisit this one day, I certainly think he will be one of those guys that I think we're gonna, come up from the graveyard and put back in the ballot. So maybe we'll get the Undertaker meme out for Dave Grohl one day. Fred Armisen at the top of the list here. So this is another big surprise in my opinion. 51.8 in season 4, jumps up to 59.1. So very close, 7 points away from the hall last season. Moves down almost, I'd say, 12 and a half points, 13 points, 59.1 goes down to 46.93. So major downgrade for Fred Armisen from season 5 to season 6. I have no idea why. JD, do you have a theory on this one?
I thought he was going to squeak in. So to me, this is almost as shocking as, well, I guess Dave Grohl isn't really shocking, is it? But yeah, this is stunning. I thought for sure he was going to pick up the votes this time to get in. And when we show you the list, we can maybe guess or make an estimate as to, or a guesstimate if you want to portmanteau it. We can try and figure out who took those votes, because that's there's no other explanation.
I think I have the answer, but we'll put a pin in that until we get to it. So
sure, okay.
Yeah, what's coming up next year as we move up past 46? Now we're getting to the high vote getters.
That's right. This is the high list now, and we're gonna, drum roll, please. Here it is. You're gonna see the inductees in the class of season 6 on this.
All right, very exciting stuff here. If you're watching the video, we're going to get to see these great results. All right, let's go from the bottom of the list. So for people who are listening along, we'll save the best for last. So Garrett Morris, original SNL cast member, comes in at a 48.6. So definite potential for Garrett to get in the final season of the SNL Hall of Fame, but not enough here, just under 50%. And then now we're going to get to all the over 50%. We have a tie here between two people who came in their third season now on the ballot. 50.28 for Chris Parnell and Vanessa Bayer. Cast members that, people really enjoyed in their time on the show. Both had very interesting histories with SNL. Chris Parnell jumps up from a 32.3 to a 50.28. So major jump, 18 points for Parnell. Vanessa Bayer up 10 points. So certainly both will have a case next season. Marty Short, who just this weekend will become a 5-timer. So I think the potential of him getting in is very exciting for next season, but moves up from a 38.6 to a 50.84. So Marty has a lot of potential there as well. Writer Paula Pell, in her final season on the ballot, does cap at a 53.63. So just 13 points away, did move up from a 41.4 to 53.63. Unfortunately, not enough for Paula, but her contributions to SNL cannot be understated. Just truly a powerful voice, one of the only women in the SNL writers room during her entire time at the show. She was always like one of 1 or 2 or 3 women there, and got a lot of sketches on, and certainly was an important part of SNL history. John Mulaney. So just to clarify, JD, this is John Mulaney as a writer, right?
This is John Mulaney as a writer. He did not get in as a host.
Okay, so he did not get in as a host, but as a writer, John Mulaney moves up from a 48.2 to a 55.31 in his second year on the ballot. So certainly on the rise. I could definitely see him getting in, only 11 points away from potentially getting in next season. So Mulaney, in the zeitgeist and always around. So I think he could get in. Lorraine Newman, original SNL cast member. I'm always of the belief that the entire original cast should just get in for their contributions to the show. Lorraine for me is a great case. 38.6 jumps up, 18, more than 18 points here to a 56.98. So getting pretty close to getting into the Hall of Fame. We'll see if she makes it next year. In his first season on the ballot, John Lovitz, RIP, gets in 57.54% of the votes. So close to getting into the Hall of Fame. Just 9 points away. So we'll see if Lovitz can do it next season. In her final season on the ballot, on very unfortunately somebody who I love and deserves a lot of applause for her time, being the first woman to ever host SNL, the first host to ever come back a second time, and that is Candice Bergen, caps off at a 58.1, so a major jump up from 35.9 in season 5. JD, are you upset about this one?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is one where she'll get an exhibit in the hall for sure, just based on the dent of what you said. First female host, and then the first one invited back. I hadn't even considered that, but yeah, absolutely. That's the idea of a reoccurring host. I mean, initially, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was going to be a standing host, wasn't it, at one point?
It was going to be actually a rotating
Oh,
cast of
rotating.
hosts that would
Okay.
just, go around and host a bunch of times. So Candy sort of institutes that idea where she hosts in episode 4 and episode 8, I believe. So, it's one of those things, that I think she would, you could go over her history and you did that beautifully in that podcast. But, she comes back for year number 2 for the Christmas episode and probably still to this date hosts one of the greatest Christmas episodes of all time in season 2. On that alone, I mean, she deserves consideration.
Yeah.
Do think, I do think that probably, time, if this was closer to, when she was hosting, I do think she probably gets in. I did have her at 22 on my host list. So for me, she definitely deserves consideration. So like you said, exhibit in the hall. But JD, here we go. 5
This one,
people
yeah.
on the list got into the Hall of Fame. Do you want to do the announcements or do you want me to do it?
You know what? I just want to give you a bit of preamble, and I want to say that I think, based on the Candice Bergen vote, this first Hall of Famer that we're going to induct has a really great induction story, number wise. And he's also somebody that I didn't know was going to get in because he's not part of the zeitgeist at all. And typically speaking, the older generation don't get in. So, John, I'll throw it to you as my guest of honor here. Who is our first inductee into the hall?
I couldn't be happier for this person to get into the Hall of Fame and get the praise that he deserves. Truly one of the greatest hosts in SNL history. He's on my Mount Rushmore of SNL hosts, and that is 10-time host Buck Henry finally makes it into the Hall of Fame after 4 seasons. 23.6 in his first season, up to a 48.92, up to a 60 last year, just close, and then 67.04% of the vote. Buck Henry finally gets into the SNL Hall of Fame. And, if you have, maybe you never heard of him because he wasn't super popular outside the show. Everyone knows, him for writing The Graduate. But as an SNL host, he was emblematic with the 70s. Everyone really felt like he was very much a part of that original cast. And, I can't imagine what the show would look like now if Buck Henry didn't influence it as much as he did in the 70s. So for me, this is a guy that you could build a statue of outside of 30 Rock and totally deserves to get into the SNL Hall of Fame here.
Oh, that's great. That would be very interesting. I think in the expedience in terms of getting through this in time, we'll move to the next one. And this is another great inductee. We've had a host, and now we get a writer, and that is Jack Handey on the 5th ballot at 69.27. John, what do you think of Jack Handey getting into the hall?
Yeah, I'm happy for Jack. I mean, like, this is a guy who everyone thought didn't really exist, right? Because you got the deep thoughts with Jack Handey, and everyone, his name was all over the show for so long, and everyone thought it was a pen name. Is there a real Jack Handey? Because he never does interviews. It's hard to find pictures of him out there. But his influence on the show for a long time, it was really, really important. A lot of writers in SNL history say that Jack Handey was their favorite writer. So, this is good on the listeners for really getting in deep with, SNL interviews and understanding how Handey contributed to the show. I often go back to his relationship with Phil Hartman, one of the greatest cast members of all time, writing Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer and, really fun sketches like that. So for me, the writers, we still need to do them justice in the voting. And I think that Handey, I think Franken and Davis got in last season. Jack Handey is now in. So this is a great thing that the voters did by getting Jack Handey into the hall here at 69.27% of the vote. All right. And then up next here, we got Kate McKinnon coming in next, an absolute fan favorite. Really just a generation of SNL fans fell in love with Kate McKinnon and feeling like they represented them on the show by getting to see her perform. And in her second season, we do get Kate McKinnon in. A lot of people were very surprised last season. She was sort of the marquee that, everyone was like, oh yeah, it's got to be, Kate's going to get in. She's one of the names. And we didn't get her. And she came in at 62.7, just missed it by a few points, but she does bump up to a 70.39%. And yeah, I mean, look, she is more recent, but I still have her as a top 10 cast member of all time. Her contributions to the show, to transition from that Kristen Wiig era and just, really take over the show for so many years. Amazing stuff from Kate. Totally well deserved.
She's a burning bright sun for sure. The next is another from season 5 that, I was a little surprised didn't get in season 5, but then I put some thought behind it, and I could sort of make sense of it. But he did get 60% last time, and that's Adam Sandler, who matches Kate McKinnon with a 70.29% or 70.39. Sorry.
Yeah, this one this is fascinating to me because, we're recording and talking about this on, the day after we got to see Adam Sandler make a cameo in the Chris Rock episode. So, congrats to Sandler. What a big weekend for him. He gets in here with 70.39%. And, as a cast member, definitely polarizing. I mean, this is, he was a huge name. People absolutely loved Sandler on the show, and then there was others that hated him because he just had this really distinct personality. They didn't love the sort of crass humor that he brought to the show. Some people even blame Sandler for the show going downhill in seasons 19 and 20. But I think that now that we're 30 years later, we look back at these things more fondly. Obviously Sandler's gone off and had one of the greatest careers coming out of the show. I think you could argue it's a top 5 career. Absolutely. So because of, the way that SNL sort of, gave him that start and then pushed him forward to creating all of these blockbusters. For me, he is, if you're going to tell the story, and the Hall of Fame is supposed to be a representation of the story of Saturday Night Live, you can't do it without Adam Sandler. So makes sense here.
Yeah. Great points. Now, John, I know 2 of these 5 inductees you did the hits for. Buck Henry and our number 1 nominee, our number 1 Hall of Famer, rather, with an almost 80%. Just a monstrous number for his second time on the ballot. I did not see this one coming, folks. It's Will Forte. John, take it away.
I'm so excited about this. Congrats to Will Forte for getting into the Hall of Fame. So well deserved. And this is one of those things that when I was watching the show, I feel like it wasn't, seeing him as a cast member, I feel like it wasn't talked about enough about how freaking good Will Forte was on the show. And he was almost like everyone's favorite cast member, but nobody wanted to admit it because he was the most fearless performer that had been on the show in a very long time. he would just try things that nobody else would try, take everything to the absolute, highest degree possible. And he's my favorite cast member to ever do it on the show. Just like crazy, the things that he would do. And I think that over time, he has become more beloved. And when he pops up in cameos, I remember last year he popped up in the Kristen Wiig episode that she hosted. He like crushed it in a couple sketches. And I just think the appreciation for Forte has finally come around. He basically is defined for having his own segment. Like every week we watch the show, we look at the 10-1, the last sketch of the night, as being something that's supposed to be silly and weird. And that is like a Will Forte creation. So I think that when we're talking about people who represent aspects of Saturday Night Live, Will Forte absolutely does that. So for me, this is a great day to be an SNL fan, to have Will Forte and Buck Henry both in the SNL Hall of Fame. Also, of course, Sandler, Kate, and Jack Handey.
Absolutely. Pat yourself on the back, John. And pat yourselves on the back, people. 5 people in the hall this year. 5 folks made it to the hall. That's a nice number. If we can do that again next year, we'll be in great shape to put a bow on this. Speaking of putting a bow on this, John, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk SNL and the SNL Hall of Fame with you today. Is there to the 0 people that are watching right now, versus the millions and millions that watch SNN's content, where can people find more of your content?
Well, thank you. But I don't think it's that many people. But you can find us at search Saturday Night Network on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify to catch up on all the content. We're currently very deep into coverage of season 50, maybe the most iconic season in SNL history. So talking about this like celebration that we're having, we're inching closer towards the 50th anniversary. So we're gonna have full coverage of that. But in case you don't know what we do over at the SNN, we got a hot take show happening every single week right after a new SNL episode is over at 1 a.m. on Saturdays. Hop on over with us. We're talking things through. We got a live chat. You can give us your opinions, and always love to incorporate them into the show. We have a Monday roundtable as well, where we break down every sketch even further. And then on Wednesdays, we have our By the Number shows, where we go through all the statistics and analytics of the week. I know a lot of SNL fans love that stuff. So Mike Murray is a great host of that show, and he goes through everything. And then if you maybe you're watching along and you're like, hey, I've heard of some of these people, but I don't understand the history of the show. We've been working on a really fun YouTube series over at the Saturday Night Network called Everything You Need to Know About Saturday Night Live, where we release sort of 15 to 20 to 25 minute videos about each season, going over the story of season 1, 2, 3, so you can catch up very quickly, and so you don't have to watch 1,000 episodes of television to feel like you understand the history of the show.
They do a really amazing job. It looks top notch. There's tidbits, there's history, there's a lot of stuff that you don't know. There's great video that you're not going to find anywhere else. Check it out for sure. It's must see if you're even remotely a fan of SNL.
Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's what I've got for you this week. And we'll be back in the fall when SNL comes back. We'll be back in the winter rather, when SNL comes back in January. My goodness gracious, I was thinking here we are in spring, but we're not. Enjoy yourselves, and if you would do me a favor, and on the way out, as you pass the weekend update exhibit, turn out the lights, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.